Hello and welcome to today's update for September the 10th, 2025. I'm Michael, coming to you from the beautiful Midlands of South Carolina on a really gorgeous September morning. This Sand Hill region actually used to be the coastline of South Carolina, but that was during the time of the dinosaurs, so a long time ago. Anyhow, this is my first news update in many years. I've steered clear of politics for a long time, and I'd like to keep it that way. But I did study this field, and I used to be active in it, and I continue to follow it closely. And I believe that despite the proliferation of alternative media over the last 10-15 years, I still have a pretty unique perspective and a passion for this field. So we're going to dig into some of the biggest power shifts happening in the world right now, from BRICS versus NATO to the rise of solar domination by one power, and the costly missile wars being waged into Ukraine between NATO and Russia. But let's first begin with the attack yesterday by Israel against Qatar. And so on September 9th, 2025, Israel launched an airstrike on Doha, Qatar, targeting a Hamas political leadership meeting aimed at deliberating a U.S. proposed Gaza ceasefire deal. The strike occurred using possibly 15 Israeli fighter jets. They dropped about 10 bombs on a residential area, and the casualties include 6 people killed, the son of Hamas leader, his office director, 3 bodyguards, and a Qatar security official. The sun has come out. It's a lot brighter right now. Hamas confirmed that its top leadership survived the attack, but it did severely impact, disrupt the peace talks. And that, I think, was the whole point of the attack. Every time we get close to a peace deal in the Middle East, every time we get close to stopping the carnage, the starvation and suffering in Gaza, the Netanyahu regime in Israel will do something like this to bring those peace talks to a halt. And I think that was really the objective, because you had peace talks going on, maybe we're getting close, and then boom, you have a lot of people killed, you have another country attacked and invaded, and so Israel took full responsibility. They asserted that they were justified in killing these people and bombing Qatar because of their ongoing conflict with Hamas in Gaza. U.S. President Trump said he was very unhappy about the strike, and he described it as an unfortunate incident that didn't serve U.S. or Israeli interests. And on that, I actually agree with him. I think he's right. It didn't serve Israeli or U.S. interests. But it did serve Netanyahu's interest. And that was the whole point. The White House revealed that Trump had directed his aide Steve Witkoff to warn Qatari officials about the strike, but they did so too late to actually do anything. And I wonder if that was by design or not. I guess we'll probably never know. In the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned the strike as a violation of Qatari sovereignty and a threat to regional stability. He called for an immediate ceasefire, the release of the few hostages that Hamas has left, and resumption of humanitarian aid for the starving people in Gaza. And of course, Israel, they're occasionally they let aid in, and then they'll stop aid, and basically what they're operating is a starvation campaign in Gaza, while they're also invading Gaza and trying to hold it with ground troops and essentially displace the local people so that they can resettle it with Israelis. That's the ultimate goal. Seems pretty clear. The same goal actually in the West Bank. Qatari response, they immediately condemned the attack, of course. Qatar labeled the attack a flagrant violation of international norms and sovereignty, and they said that they didn't have word from the United States in time to actually do anything to prevent the attack. Their prime minister called it state terrorism, and I have to agree with him. It definitely was state terrorism. And he said that Qatar reserves the right to respond. But of course, we know the U.S. is not going to let Qatar really respond in any meaningful way. The Qatari Prime Minister reaffirmed their commitment to peace, and so that's good news, actually, that they're going to try to continue the peace process. So we don't know exactly what Hamas is how they are going to react. We do know how Israel is going to react based on the last few years. We know that the Netanyahu regime will continue to try to block any permanent peace deal. So an overall snapshot of the whole thing: we had Israeli attack on Doha and Qatar, targeting Hamas leaders who were involved in ceasefire discussions. He had 6 people killed, including Hamas leaders and a Qatari official. The Hamas leaders all survived. I said including Hamas leader was killed. That was the son of a Hamas leader. Excuse me for that. The U.S. reaction: U.S. expressed discontent, and they also assured Qatar that this wouldn't happen again. But then again, the U.S. gives Israel a blank slate to do whatever they want, so I don't think that Qatar can really rely on those assurances. I think that something like this probably will happen again if peace talks resume. I believe that Netanyahu is just dedicated to preventing peace in the area. The UK had a stronger reaction. They called for a ceasefire and aid. Russia condemned it as a violation of international law, and Qatar called it state terrorism. Alright, so let's get into our main topic for today now that we've covered this horrible news out of the Middle East. BRICS versus NATO. And here we're looking at the balance of power in the world. And let's start by saying that this has changed over time, even over my lifetime. I'm almost 50 years old now, and so I grew up during the Cold War. And when I was growing up, there was 2 powers, and everybody was basically divided between one of those 2 positions. There was a non-aligned movement, but most countries were forced to choose between Western liberal democracy, NATO, and the communists. And then we had, after the fall of communism, the fall of the USSR, we had a unipolar moment where the U.S. basically dominated the world by itself and fought a series of wars of choice, wars it didn't really have to fight, against Serbia, against Iraq twice, against Afghanistan, a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan and so forth. But that was the unipolar moment, and now I would argue that that moment is gone. And now we're entered into a multipolar age. And U.S. sanctions on Russia, tariffs on China, India, and Brazil, plus diplomatic blunders recently with both India and China. And actually, as far as India, the West had been pulling India towards it and trying to pry it away from China, prevent it from aligning with China and Russia. But these recent high tariffs on India have gotten to the point now where, from what I understand, the Indian leader won't even take calls from the White House. So that's, President Trump had tried to, called on him and tried to get him to stop buying cheap Russian oil. And basically India said that they're going to continue to buy the oil that they have to provide for over 1 billion people. And that buying more expensive U.S. oil, for instance, would destroy their economy, would set them back severely. So they're looking out for India first. You can't really blame them for that. But these blunders have really pushed BRIC nations closer together. And this is the first time in history, really, where you had Russia, India, and China all as one single block together against NATO. So it's not really the future multipolar world, it's the present multipolar world. And let's think about this. If you add up all the NATO countries together, they make up about 12% of the world's population. That's the United States, Western Europe, all the NATO countries, 12%. If you add up all of the BRICS countries together, and you include their allies, Iran and North Korea, you get half of the world's population. 12% versus half. Pretty big difference there. And when you look at GDP, NATO together, they make up about half of the world's economy, which is pretty impressive. 12% of the population of the world making up half of the world's economy. The BRICS and their allies, they make up about 37% of the world's economy. And it's starting to warm up here in this sun. It was very almost cold early, but now we're getting warming up fast. This is more like South Carolina weather here. And the future is not looking good for NATO. You have shrinking birth rates in NATO. Many of these NATO countries have populations that are rapidly declining. They're disappearing as a people because they have so few children, and as a response, they're bringing in mass numbers of people from the third world, people who not really able to assimilate. It's causing a lot of social chaos. You see riots and demonstrations in England. You've seen all kinds of chaos in France and Germany as well. You also have rising debt, and this used to not really be a problem in Germany, but it is now. And at a moment when they're trying to grow their military for a future confrontation, Merz seems to believe that they're going to be at war with Russia soon. I don't think that's going to happen, but they're trying to beef up their military at a time when they're having rise in debt, and they're trying to clear the way for more debt. And debt is also a major problem in the UK, where they may even have to take an IMF loan, an IMF bailout, which would be truly something else. Excuse me for a second. Meanwhile, BRICS, with countries like India, are just starting to flex their potential, and they could keep gaining ground for years to come. The same is true in China. Russia's economy is growing, although they're having troubles now with this war. But once the war is over, I foresee them getting back to a lot of growth per year. So the multipolar world isn't coming. It's not out there in the future. It really already is here. And let's look at a couple ways in which it's here. First, solar domination. All right, so solar generated electricity today makes up only about 7% of all the electricity in the world. 7%. But back in 2020, it was only 3%. So you've seen massive growth in that short period of time. And I don't know about where you live, but even here in South Carolina, which is not a particularly friendly state towards solar energy, we rank in the top 10 most hostile states to solar. As far as the government incentives and the structure of things here, it's just not very receptive to solar here. But even despite that, I've seen a lot of solar really take off here, and I'm sure in other areas it's taken off in a much bigger way. Now, so this is one of the most important and one of the most fast-growing technologies of our time. And who leads the charge? China leads the charge. There's no question about it. They produce about 80% of the world's solar panels. That is amazing. One country produces 80% of the world's solar panels. The U.S. only produces about 2%. That is incredible. The 2% that the U.S. produces is almost a rounding error to the Chinese production. And China also consumes 39% of the world's solar electricity, while the U.S. is second, but it only produces, it's a distant second, it consumes 12% of the world's solar energy or solar electricity. So 39% versus 12%. And if you look at the countries after that, in case you're wondering, India comes next. So there's another BRICS country. By 2030, China's projected to use almost half of the world's solar electricity, and they have some major solar projects coming online right now. So this is not just dominance, this is almost complete control of this field. This is dominance on a massive scale and about one of the most important technologies of our era. And I don't know about you, but I guess I was skeptical a little bit about solar in the beginning. After that last terrible hurricane that we had come through here and we lost power for about 2 weeks, I bought a solar generator and a couple panels, and I've actually used it a lot. It's been pretty awesome. I'm really happy with it. I've kind of changed my perspective on solar, and I'd really like to see us embrace it, but it doesn't look like we're going that way. It looks like China will continue to dominate the solar field for a long time to come. Okay, finally, let's talk about something pretty exciting, and that is missiles. If you're like me, you've been following this missile war in the Ukraine. A lot of this war is waged with mortar rounds and with drones and with missiles. The main U.S. missile that everyone's heard of is the Patriot missile. And that missile cost the United States government about $4 million for one missile. And the U.S. made about 500 of those missiles in 2024. Now, these are interceptor missiles. They shoot down enemy missiles. All right, let's compare that to the Russian ballistic Iskander missile. The Ukrainians claim that the Iskanders cost $3 million or more each. Russia claims that they cost less than $1 million each. Both sides have their incentives to kind of twist the truth. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Probably somewhere maybe around $1 to $2 million apiece. But they're definitely way cheaper than the Patriot missiles. And these missiles go Mach 6 or 7. And Russia made 700 of these Iskander missiles in 2024, and they could probably make over 1,000 this year. And they're on pace to make maybe 1,500 next year, it looks like. They're set up to do that. So, how do the Patriots perform against the Iskanders? That's the real question. Well, Ukrainian sources say one Patriot hits one Iskander in ideal conditions maybe 1 out of every 6 times. Not very good. The U.S. says it's even worse, 1 out of every 7 times. And again, these are in ideal conditions. But the battlefield is never ideal conditions. So when Russia fires one of these Iskander missiles, they normally do so with a massive barrage of drones. They'll send out several hundred drones. Now they're getting close to the point where they'll be able to send up 1,000 drones a night. When they get to that point, this is pretty amazing. So they send those up, plus they have decoys that they send up, and then they send the Iskander with those. And so normally the Iskander gets through. Now if you read Ukrainian reports of these strikes, despite their information, their claim that they only shoot down 1 out of every 6 in ideal conditions, they often claim that they shoot down 99.9% of all the drones and missiles that Russia fires. And this is just not realistic. This is wartime propaganda, and both sides do it. I'm not blaming them for doing it. I'm just saying you gotta take these numbers that come out of Kiev with a big grain of salt. It's just not accurate. We can watch videos of these missiles hitting Ukrainian targets. They've played havoc on their infrastructure. We just know that a lot of these missiles are getting through. And according to the government's numbers, most of them getting through. And that's why, if they have them available, the Ukraine, really the U.S., because the U.S. is supplying it, setting up, targeting them. I guess the only thing the Ukrainians do is come in and press a little button at the end. But if they have them, they will come in that they would use 2 or more Patriots per Iskander to try to have a good chance at hitting the Iskanders. But even still, they're shooting down the Iskanders, even when using 2 or more Patriots, less than half the time. So, if you're talking about money here, Russia spends maybe $1, possibly $2 million per Iskander missile. The U.S. spends, if they shoot 2 Patriots, they're spending $8 million trying to shoot down that $1 million missile. They're spending $8 million. And there's all the damage that those missiles are doing to take into consideration. And then you also have to consider the damage on the Ukrainian infrastructure that these are inflicting. And final consideration is Lockheed Martin, who makes these Patriot missiles. They pocket about $500,000 in profit per missile. So they have a big incentive to continue to make these missiles, sell them to the U.S. government, despite the fact that they're not very effective. And also take some of the profit from this and lobby the government to buy more, which they're actually doing. They're trying to get it up to 650 a year by 2027. To buy more of these and to send more to the Ukraine so that they can be blown up trying to take down Iskander missiles. So my question to you is, does any of this sound sustainable from NATO's perspective? The answer pretty clearly is no. This is not sustainable. It's a lot of our tax money going down the drain. In most cases, it's not really even doing anything. And Ukrainian targets are being blown up every day. Meanwhile, Russia's producing more and more of these very effective Iskander missiles. Not sustainable at all. And that is why, so I recently asked him, I'm a high-ranking member of the military, he's in my family, about this situation, and he said that's why lasers will be very important in the future. And so I agree with him. Lasers will be very important in trying to shoot down missiles in the future, but we're not there yet. And the cost for those is going to be enormous, especially the energy production that they're going to consume. It's going to be enormous. So we're just not there yet. In the meantime, Russia's continuing to dominating the field with their missiles. So that's all for today's episode. We've covered BRICS versus NATO, the future of solar energy and the domination of solar by China, and then the missile game, which Russia is dominating against NATO in the Ukraine. And we also looked at the beginning about the Israeli strike on Qatar and the international fallout from that strike. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back with you soon with more world news.